like you, Bishop Morris, I'm going to take my watch off. I've always watched Bishop Morris take his watch off. I know some of you all don't know that he looks at it exactly all the time, but this is real special time for me, and such an amazing morning, and I'm so honored and pleased to be here and be in the presence of you all and be here for this day. And this is a time of many memories. And I want to say I'm going to be a little personal and a little selfish, because I'm going to tell our family story. And I tell that story not to bring any particular credit to us, but to bring credit to this community and this church. And I know there are others here who have similar stories, whose roots are just as deep, and who could tell a very, very similar story. But I want to bring this in the perspective of being able to say that this church and this community are a core part of me and my family for all my life, for the life of my parents, for the lives of my grandparents, and those even before them. I am especially thankful for this opportunity because my 2 children are here and 4 of my 6 grandchildren are here, as well as many members of our family and members of my sister's family. My thoughts today revolve around the love of family, the love of friends, and the love of neighbors, anchored in the love of God and faith in Jesus Christ. What the lesson is about is founded on what I learned in this church and in this community. So let me put some historical context to bear here, if you will bear with me for 200 plus years. 1785, Isaac Baker came across the mountains and settled in Sumner County. Isaac Baker came from Pennsylvania and settled in what we call the Salem community over on the other side of Red River Road, between Red River and 109. Minnie Louise Baker, who's on this window back here, Minnie Louise Baker, interestingly, was the double great-granddaughter of Isaac and Molly Blakemore. The double great-granddaughter, because her lineage went back through both her parents to Isaac Baker and his wife. Minnie married Charles Clark Bone in 1897. I can't tell you that wedding happened. I know it did happen in this church, because I think this church didn't open until 1899. But I think for sure it happened in this community. Charles Clark Bone was born in 1872, the son of William Leonidas Bone, and Jane Clark, whom he married in 1852. Now, the reason I would mention Jane Clark is because for those of you who are here in Sumner County and who have some interest in the history of Sumner County, Jane Clark grew up in the building, the home down at the corner of Station Camp Creek and Long Haul Pike, now called the Douglas Clark House, and being restored. And the walkway, the greenway, is already open down there. And the reason that's a historical home in this county is that Jane Clark, 3 brothers, died in the Civil War. Hence, they call the Daughters of the Confederacy here the Clark chapter. Now, step back from the Civil War just a few years, and in the 1830s, 1838, I think to be exact, you Methodists didn't just start Liberty. As I understand it, you started 4 churches in Sumner County. He started the church at Rehoboth. We'll come back to that down in Cage's Bend. Douglas Chapel down on Long Hollow Pike. Salem over on the other side there, close to where Isaac Baker came in 1785, and Liberty. And after Minnie Louise Baker and Charles Clark Bone were married in 1852, they lived on Red River Road. You know, we don't call it Red River Road now, we call it Highway 25 for some reason, but they had 4 children, including Edward, who's the father of my cousin Peggy, who's here today. She came with her husband all the way from Chicago for this event this weekend. William Leonidas Bone, another William Leonidas Bone, my father. We've never been able to get one of the grandchildren to take that Leonidas name for some reason, but I'm sure it has a lot of historical significance. William Leonidas Bone was born in 1910 and died in 1999. He was born and died on the same farm on Red River Road. Very seldom today, Mr. Collier, Mr. David, do I know anybody who was born and died on the very same piece of property. And it was a different house. We moved into a new home in 1960. But when the number 6 back here was dedicated in 2002, interestingly, to Charles Clark Bone and Minnie Baker Bone and Billy Bone, William Leonidas Bone, but not to Noakes Bone, who married in 1940. And interestingly, this is in memory of, so she didn't qualify. Doesn't qualify yet. There's the other reason she doesn't qualify. She's a Baptist. Now, she has some Methodist roots because when she was growing up down in Cage's Bend, there wasn't a Baptist church, so she had to go to Rehoboth, the church. Well, her father was a sharecropper down there, and this was in the 1920s, and their family went to Rehoboth. But as soon as they could get out of the Bend, they became members at First Baptist Church in Gallatin. She and Daddy married in 1940 and lived with Minnie Baker Bone and my grandfather. Well, lived with Minnie Baker Bone. My grandfather, Charles Clark Bone, died in 1933. He was at age 59. Daddy came home from the war in 45. I was born in 46, one of the original baby boomers. My sister was born in 1950. My grandmother, Minnie Baker Bone, died in 1954. And Billy Bone became a Baptist. Now, he was a really good Baptist, but he, like a lot of us over the years, knew that his family needed to be together in one church. And he knew he was never going to get Noakes Bone to be a Methodist. So they started going to First Baptist Church, and they've been in the First Baptist Church all their life, since 1954. But he never, ever forgot this church. And Mr. Collier knows, Ms. Conquest knows, and some of the rest of you know, there was never a more special place to him than Liberty Community, than the community house or the community Liberty Church. He never stopped loving and supporting this church. And he never failed to recognize that this was where his roots were so deeply planted. And he was the first one to teach me that it doesn't necessarily mean, if you are in the Lord's house, if you are worshiping the Lord, it doesn't necessarily make a difference what name is on the front door. And that's something that I have come to love about what I was taught growing up. So why all this history? Why all of this personal information. Again, it's not because I want to brag about who we are or about our family or our roots here, because so many of you all have similar stories. It's as I have thought about what I wanted to say today, I have realized more than ever that every value, every belief I have is rooted in this community, and is founded significantly as a result of the influence of my family, this church, and the community. Now, there's some memories, I'm not going to go through them, that I don't particularly cherish about growing up in this community. As soon as I could get off the farm and get away from baling hay and planting tobacco and cutting tobacco and anything else involved the farm, I wanted to get away. Now, Bill Trout, he's still out there doing it, and I admire him for it, and he loves it. But I just didn't take to it very well. So I was glad to get off the farm. I just didn't take to it. Secondly, my talent in sports peaked at about age 10. So I knew I couldn't be a farmer and I couldn't be an athlete. And as Jimmy knows, my talents in music peaked when I was in high school, when the band director said, "You can play the drum really well, and you can march really good, but you don't do them very well at the same time." Amen. So, we don't need any more amen. So, what was left, when you can't do anything else, you become a lawyer. And what's really interesting about that is, within sight of this church, there were 4 of us who became lawyers during that era growing up here. The Ridley boys, Jimmy and Nathan Ridley and Pat Flynn, all just right down the road here, all became lawyers along with me. So there were some of us, several of us, who just didn't take to farming. Pat Flynn's brother, of course, Frank, who lived down the road, and he took to farming like Bill did, but again, we couldn't do that. My biggest disappointment about that was my #1 babysitter growing up was Mrs. Lanier, Miss Ann Liza. I called her Diza when I started growing up. She lived, for those of you, the house is gone, of course, but it's the corner of Village Green and Red River Road is where Mrs. Lanier and her sister and her son, Mr. Mayo, lived. I see some of you nodding.
Yeah, how old was she when she babysat you? About 85?
Yeah, she was
Really?
about 85.
Really?
Yeah, that's right. She was 85. She and my Bonnie used to sit on the front porch and watch the cars go by, count the cars going down Red River Road. But she was really disappointed that I was going to be a lawyer. I went to see her one day, and she said, I just don't think much of lawyers, no matter what. I said, well, you've known me all my life. You raised me, She said, I don't care. You got a whole lot of work to do if you're going to be a lawyer. Now, Mr. Mayo, he was sitting there. He was 88 at the time I went to see him, and he said, I just feel awful. I just don't know whether I'm going to make it. And I said, well, what's wrong? He said, well, I quit smoking 6 months ago, and I thought I'd feel a lot better by now. But since I've smoked 80 years and only quit for 6 months, I thought there'd be some miracle here that would cure me, but there wasn't much to be said for that. So I have all of these great memories. I want to just speak for a minute about the lesson today, which is the parable of the Good Samaritan. All of you all know that story. Know that Jesus told that story in several of the Gospels, but I used the book of Luke here for the passage, and I'm not going to read the entire passage. In some places they say someone learned in the law tried to trick him by asking him these questions about who the neighbor was. And, of course, I've always thought that was a lawyer, you know, trying to be smart at it, and trying to come up with a way to trick Jesus. But Jesus was very clear. And what's really interesting, and what I really want to read rather than Luke, he was really clear because he was quoting Deuteronomy. And he was quoting Leviticus. He was talking about the two great commandments, love God and love your neighbor. And what I'm so thankful for are the neighbors that we've had here for hundreds of years in this community, and for what those neighbors mean. And I'd like to just take just a second and really refer you to Leviticus 19, because I think that speaks to us as neighbors in this community. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over the vineyard a second time, or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and for the foreigner. I am the Lord your God. Do not steal, do not lie, do not deceive one another, do not swear falsely by my name, and do not profane the name of God. I am the Lord. Do not defraud your neighbors. Do not rob your neighbors. Do not hold back the wages of a hired hand overnight. Do not pervert justice. Do not show partiality. Do not go about spreading slander among your people. Do not do anything that endangers your neighbor's life. I am the Lord. Do not do anything that endangers your neighbor's life. I am the Lord. Then if you go to Deuteronomy, this is special to me, because this is where I go back to Red River Road, and where I hope my family, my home, and my children and my grandchildren will speak up and speak out. Deuteronomy 6, verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I have given you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road. When you lie down and when you get up. Then this. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on your door frames of your house and on your gates. This was written on our door frame, on our gates in the Liberty community when I was growing up. Love God. Love your neighbor. Be your neighbor's helper. What I've learned, love God. Love your neighbor. Your neighbors are the ones who help when you lose a job, when your home burns down, when your daughter fights cancer for 7 years and leaves 4 children, when we go to war, and when we come home, no matter what our condition. When we have droughts, and when we have floods. When you lose your ability to serve others every day like you have for decades, that's when your neighbors step up and comfort you. When you can no longer live alone at home, that's when neighbors come and what neighbors do. And when you die, neighbors come